In response to the corona pandemic, the Indian government announced a 21-day lockdown on March 24, 2020. This was the first of the many successive rounds of lockdown to come. Almost on cue, crowds of hundreds of thousands turned up at train stations and bus depots in big cities like Delhi and Mumbai. These were people who had moved to big cities from various other parts of India, doing low-paying temporary jobs in construction, in factories, in hotels and restaurants. Rather than staying put at their homes and social distancing and self-isolating, they were trying to squeeze themselves into crowded buses and trains to get back home. Many who could not get into buses and trains were prepared to walk. After walking and hitchhiking hundreds of kilometers, they reached home. Unfortunately, this does not end in a happy reunion with their families.
They have to undergo quarantine, they have to, get a test done if there is some suspicion.
Libby Johnson is the executive director of Gram Vikas, an NGO that works with rural communities in states like Jharkhand and Odisha, home to millions of people who migrate to big cities in other states to earn their livelihoods.
In most parts of rural Odisha, which is what I am familiar with, the quarantine centers have been set up by the government with the panchayats and all that. But tests and getting rid of the uncertainty about an infection is still not very robust. So the village is suspicious of me because I've come from outside. So I have no way to prove that I'm not carrying the virus. So we still find the stigmatization around returned people. The second is, at the end of the quarantine, there isn't much scope for food other than what they have at home. Now that is a difficult situation for a lot of families. Families with a bit of land and therefore having harvested the monsoon crop, with the harvest would have ended in December and January, would have access to some food grains. The public distribution system, grains have also reached in many places, but that is only the food grain. Now that doesn't fulfill the food, your food basket isn't complete. So there isn't money to buy anything more. The markets are closed. So most of these, in the southern and southwestern parts of Odisha, most of the purchases happen in the weekly market, the weekly hart. Because of the lockdown, the weekly harts have been closed. So families, even if they have money, ability to buy groceries and condiments and spices and oil and all that is still limited. So that is the second part. The third is employment. A lot of them, especially the migrants, many of them have foregone wages of the last 15, 20 days or months work when they returned. So they have very few. In fact, when we did a survey with about 400, sample of 400 workers, we found that 20% of them had no cash. This was in the first week of May before the return had started. 20% of them reported they have no cash. Another 25% had less than 2,000 rupees in cash. Only 10% had more than 8,000 rupees in hand. Now that's, and these are people who earn 800, 600, 800 rupees a day. Now imagine people who earn much less than that and what would be their cash savings. And their families anyway were dependent on their remittances for their, quality of life, and that's closed now. NREGS has resumed. The NREGS work has started. Resumption, some work is happening, but it won't be sufficient to meet the immediate income needs, cash needs of the family. Something that is likely to have longer term implications is also the uncertainty. Very few of them have believed that there is light at the end of this tunnel at the moment, because unlike in the past when a flood came and they had to run back or something, something more episodic happened and they had to come back, they knew that that episode will move on and they would get back. And there would be some kind of an assurance from the other side, be it their employer or their contractor, that come back in 3 months, things will normalize. Today, I find this to be the single most factor of difficulty, that none of them have any source of hope.
So how do we make things better for migrant workers? Politicians and policymakers have been saying that the thing to do is to develop rural areas. to repair all that is dysfunctional in the agricultural sector so that rural Indians would not need to migrate. And that's certainly logical, but rural development and boosting agriculture has been the goal of central and state governments and NGOs for 75 years now. Progress towards that goal has been slow for a number of reasons which still exist. We cannot accelerate and reach the goal anytime soon just by deciding to do so.
When we ask these people in our survey, what would be the income level at which you would not want to migrate? I think 70% came to 10,000 rupees a month. The ILO found in a much larger survey that people refer to 375 rupees a day as the income. And if you look at 375 into 30, that comes to 10,000. So 10,000 is now the holy grail. I mean, that is the, the income that people would want. But, this one block in Kalahandi district, tribal hilly block, if you look at the government data, the socio-economic caste census data, 1% of the households have reported 10,000 rupees monthly income. And those are the ones in business or small enterprises or in service. So 10,000 rupees is what will force people to, or what will motivate people to stay back, and that isn't going to happen very, very easily.
So migration will continue no matter what. Surely the discussion then should be about how to ensure that it is safe and dignified. One area where gains could be made in the short or medium term is upskilling. If migrant workers have more opportunities to upgrade their skills, they would have a career path open to them on which they could move to higher paying, more secure jobs. With those, they would be less vulnerable the next time an emergency situation like the COVID pandemic hits their lives.
Low-hanging fruit there is the opportunity to skill these people, because these are people who've already gone out of their, immediate zone of comfort in their village, taken some risks, undergone some experiences. Can we build upon that to make them better skilled and better capable? So let me take two examples here, Abraham. One in the construction sector. So you have youngsters who've been working in the construction sites as helpers. These are young people, capable people. They may not have the educational qualification to become a mason if you go by the educational qualification, but having spent 3-4 years on the site, they would have already dabbled with masonry. Now, let's say something simple as brick masonry, building walls. Now, building walls is something you need to understand line, you need to understand angle, and you need to understand joints, the plumb, the angle, and the joints. Now, for somebody who's already seen it happening, somebody watched 3-4 years how somebody has been doing that, the kind of upgradation needed is probably 30-40 days of intensive training on doing that only. At the end of that, you can certify that person as a mason. You can do a test and certify that person as a mason. Let me take the second example before I go on to answer your question. We find a lot of youngsters who worked in the restaurants in Kerala, going from Odisha. So when you start in a restaurant, you start the job of a busboy, the cleaning person. Then you become a waiter. So when you're a cleaning person, you probably get about 8,000 rupees a month, no tips. When you move to become a waiter, it goes up to about 10,000 rupees and you pocket the tips. And then starts the upskilling. So in Kerala, where they make these Malabar parathas, so there's something called a paratha master. Now the paratha master is highly valued, 25,000 rupees a month. The tea maker, the guy who makes tea, 18 to 20,000 rupees a month. Now these people, these youngsters, when you ask them, especially those who've been working in restaurants, what is your dream? I want to become the tea master. I want to become the paratha master. Now you're already seeing how people are aspiring to the next levels. Now they are not making these claims like when we were in school and when in class 3 we said, I want to become the Prime Minister of India. It's not that kind of claims. It's something that you've seen happening, and I believe that I have it in me to become the paratha master. So can I get training for 2 months to do that? So now recognizing this, I think, is the first point. Can government do this on its own? I don't think it should, because the industry has a role to play. So where government needs to change its approach is in currently the national skill NSQ the National Skill Qualification Framework provides for intensive training for 3 months and job placement at the end of that. A more, on the job training or learning while you are working. So you train, you work in the morning, you train in the afternoon kind of system. You still do, our policy still doesn't have that flexibility. That flexibility needs to be brought in. The industry will have to step in and say that yes, let's say an established hotel where they have 20 workers in their restaurant would say that, okay, I'll have this batch of 20 people work in the morning. I will allow them to go and train in the evening. And I would tie up with the training institute to make sure that, I will provide them accommodation and they can come back and stay there. So I have 20 people working and 20 people working in the afternoon, some kind of a, situation like that, which at least some of these industries have come around to accepting. So in construction, it can happen. In many of the service sector jobs, it can happen. So you need a little more flexible programming from the government side, because government continues to be the biggest benefactor as far as skilling programs are concerned. There is already evidence of this being possible. We need to get the government programming to become a little more flexible and, create the ecosystem for this to happen.